Greetings. I'm currently maintaining a playlist of videos which look at the various claims about what, if any, language appears on the pews at First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. And I have videos on whether Hebrew appears on the pews. I have videos on the case for Arabic on the pews. I have a video on whether Ge'ez appears on the pews, a video on whether Amharic appears on the pews, yet another video on whether Aramaic appears on the pews, and I even have a video which puts forth a methodological thought experiment which explores whether Yiddish might appear on the pews. And because I covered that range of topics, I wanted to make this brief video, which explores yet another question along those lines. Does the Ewe language appear on the pews? Now, I fully concede up front that this particular claim will seem minor and perhaps trivial compared to other claims that have been discussed in previous videos, but like I alluded to a moment ago, as I'm developing a playlist which documents the different claims about the pews, I wanted to document this claim as well. Also, I think the claim that we'll be looking at here and the arguments which were put forth with that claim hit at least a couple of the same methodological concerns that I've touched on in previous videos. So it also seemed worth looking into this precisely because it shows a similar pattern in certain instances, even if the precise conclusion is different from those of others. So jumping right in, the relevant claim came up in this thread on Facebook, and I'll share a link to the thread in the video description. It's a thread in the Jews versus Hebrew Israelites Let's Debate forum on Facebook. And it begins right away. The whole thread is about the different elements that are found within First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. And, the original post at the start of the thread focuses on what's been described as the Kongo cosmogram. But what I want to focus on is, in the midst of the discussion, there was this comment, and it led to a subthread, but this comment by a gentleman who goes by the name Richardo Pauliston. And he wrote the following: "The church those holes are found in was built by Jews. The evidence is the cursive Hebrew written on the seats. This church is in Savannah, Georgia. This was a stupid attempt to discredit Yah's people. Also, this was built way before the Ashkenaz created the state of Israel. So how did they write in cursive Hebrew? Obviously, they were the real Jews, but were not recognized because they were slaves. So the Ashkenaz took our or their identity and language." And by the way, regarding that claim that modern Hebrew was invented in the context of the pews, it's intended, at least here, as a way of distancing the pews from standard Hebrew. I've covered variations of this reasoning before in a video titled FABC, or First African Baptist Church New Hebrew, when no one else did. Kelly Richardson has made an argument along those lines, proposing that Hebrew was written on the pews before the Hebrew language was resurrected by Ashkenazim. The battle rapper known as Street Hymns later echoed that claim, and Benaiah Israel's documentary titled Reclaiming the Throne alluded to it as well. And I'll link to the relevant video in the description for anyone who's interested in that discussion. But my point here is that this gentleman, while perhaps taking a less popular approach to the pews and reaching a less popular conclusion, was nonetheless echoing certain talking points which have been floating around discussions about the pews for years. But anyway, getting back to the thread, some less than cordial, acrimonious discussion unfolded between these gentlemen. So, for example, at one point, Richardo, responding to the author of the thread, the man who started the thread, he wrote, "Slaves who wrote in cursive Hebrew, they were obviously Jews," shaking my head, LOL, whatever. Right? And so at this point, I got involved in the thread, and I wrote, I told them that no coherent Hebrew has yet been found on the pews, and I pointed out that I have a playlist of videos that takes a detailed look at this. And then I even state at the end that while I'm skeptical that any language appears on the pews, if there is, it seems that the strongest case is for Arabic. And I've pointed that out before, and I actually might discuss that again in a future video. But whatever the case, the gentleman, Richardo, the man who started this subthread, responded to me, and he said he needed some time to get back to me, but he said he had spoken to the gentleman who made the video. So I told him, take your time, and I asked which man he had spoken with. And so when he got back to the thread, he said his name starts with Abu, so he was referring to me. Full disclosure, I don't remember previously speaking or corresponding with this gentleman. Whatever the case, referring to me, he says, Abu, the man who's narrating the video you sent me, says, and this is where his argument starts to unfold. He says, in the first video, he seems to correct the brother with modern Hebrew. But if you look at the website of this church, they say this Hebrew on the pews is no longer spoken anymore, which is not true. The Hebrew on these pews is Eʋegbe, the Ewe language. So what this gentleman is starting to say is that the reason why people who are familiar with modern Hebrew don't understand what's on the pews is because it's not modern Hebrew. It's actually Eʋegbe. So he's pulling in another claim on that's found in various pockets of the internet, which is the claim that the Ewe language, Eʋegbe, is actually the true Paleo-Hebrew. And he continues. He said in the video, he shows writings on the pews that show a symbol that I have found in the Eʋegbe. Here it is. He says, I circled the letter that represents a re in Eʋegbe. And let me zoom in so you can see that character. It's actually the Latin gamma. But he continues, he said, the reason this is being scrutinized is because it's being compared to modern Hebrew. But compare it to Eʋegbe, which I believe is the real Hebrew, and then it makes sense. And then he writes one more thing. He says, as you can see in the video you sent me, it has the symbol in Eʋegbe, but Abu claims that it's a different spelling in cursive Hebrew and that it doesn't mean ayin. He says, well, I showed you the Eʋegbe alphabet. It definitely doesn't stand for ayin, but it's re. Now, the Eʋegbe language has been spoken since the 12th century. 12th century AD. Modern Hebrew was invented in the 19th century. The church just made the wrong comparison, comparing it with the wrong language. And then he provided a screenshot of from my very first video, and you'll see there's he's highlighted an image that he took. He highlighted the screenshot or still that he took from my video. And then from there, I responded to him in detail. I guess I could scroll through it slowly for anyone who's interested, or you could just click the link that I put in the video description, and you can find the thread there. But now I can, discuss our conversation. Our correspondence actually stopped there. It didn't evolve from there. But what I wanted to say was that his arguments take us back to an issue that I've been trying to discuss for years, from the very beginning of my first video on the topic of the pews. In fact, I was even discussing this years before my first video on this topic in a post to Vocab Malone's Facebook forum, which I wrote way back in December of 2016, so a little over 7 years ago. I was trying to convey to people who were making claims about what languages allegedly appear on the pews that you can't infer language from mere resemblances to individual characters. There has to be a larger surrounding context to establish the presence of a specific language. And this is a point I've continued to make across multiple videos in the 7 years since that post. But I think we should get into this issue one more time, as it's clearly a point that many miss, from the guys who are new to the topic, like this gentleman who authored this subthread, to even the most seasoned proponents of language on the pews, like Kelly Richardson over at the We Woke Now channel, who himself tried to argue for Ge'ez on the pews on the strength of resemblances to individual Ge'ez characters. But whatever the case, let's engage in a thought experiment, right, that might help to illustrate the problems here. Suppose this marking appeared on the pews. Now, that marking certainly does look like the Ewe character re, which is to say the Latin gamma, but is that what we're actually looking at, right? Or might that be something else? And it's here that the surrounding context becomes important. For example, suppose that the surrounding context is as follows. In this case, yes, it is clearly a character from the Latin alphabet used by Eʋegbe, as that's an Eʋegbe phrase. I actually took it from an Eʋegbe translation of Genesis 1:14. It means something along the lines of teaching the times or something like that. Or I guess, in light of what the verse means, maybe teaching the seasons or the times of days. I don't know. But with that said, here, with this context, it's clearly a character from Eʋegbe's use of the Latin script. It's clearly the Latin gamma, right? That's undeniable. Eʋegbe would clearly be present in this set of markings. But let's erase that so we can imagine a different surrounding set of markings. Suppose the surrounding context was like this instead. In this case, that is not the Latin gamma. Rather, it's clearly the Arabic alif lam, two Arabic characters together. And we can infer that from its place in this clearly Arabic phrase, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God. And remember the gentleman's comment, which shared a screenshot from my video and highlighted a part of the still that he took from that video? And remember how he said the relevant marking was the Ewe letter Gre, which is to say the Latin gamma? Ironically, what actually appeared in that image is in the context of that very same Arabic phrase, La ilaha illallah. For me, I would say that this is a glaring example of the problems with this approach, which tries to infer language from a resemblance to an individual character. See, he looked at a phrase which was undeniably Arabic, at least for anyone familiar with Arabic, yet he felt that what he was looking at was the Ewe language, because the Arabic alif lam resembles the Latin gamma, which is used to write Eʋegbe. Now, to be clear, I just want to state that I am not trying to pick on that gentleman or try to shame him or anything like that. Rather, I'm trying to highlight the methodological pitfalls of an approach that many proponents of language on the pews have been employing for years. And with that in mind, I want to give one more example in this thought experiment. So let's remove that surrounding text and introduce a new context. If the surrounding text looked like this, then the relevant marking would be neither the Latin gamma used by Eʋegbe, nor would it be the alif lam of Arabic. Rather, it would clearly be a cursive Hebrew ayin, as in this context, it is clearly part of a phrase which reads in Hebrew, Shama li Amalek, hear me, Amalek, or listen to me, Amalek. So I would invite each viewer to look at the three phrases we considered in this thought experiment. The exact same two markings, the exact same marking which appeared twice, that exact same set of markings were used in each phrase. Yet what those markings symbolized differed from phrase to phrase based on the surrounding context. They came off as different characters from completely different scripts based on the surrounding context. So once again, to infer a specific language from a marking resembling an individual character in a script used to write a language, you have to make recourse to the surrounding context. Trying to look at resemblances to characters in a vacuum it's simply bad methodology, which can lead to all sorts of false positives, and thus it leaves room for incredible skepticism if this is the strongest point in your argument. And with that, I'll close this video here. I just wanted to make this brief video, again, in part because I want to document different claims which are being made about the markings on the pews, but also because the reasoning I saw in the Facebook correspondence we looked at employed some familiar lines of reasoning, which I've been trying to help people with for years. So as the same methodological issues keep popping up, it seemed worthwhile to keep addressing them. And God willing, I hope to have more videos on the pews, as there are some other issues which warrant a reply, but maybe that'll be in the coming weeks, I don't know. For now, I'll simply note that everyone is invited to share any comments, questions, or objections they might have. You see, I don't censor comments on this channel, so feel free to share your thoughts, whether positive or negative, and God bless.